and joining us for our first What Matters to Me, which will be a part of this series. At no other time, I think, that I've been here have I felt like there's been a bigger need for us to just be together in shared space as communities, students, faculty, and staff. And so this is an opportunity to come together, hear some amazing topics and amazing speakers, but also just spend time with each other, doing a little shift from whatever our day-to-day brought us, and just spend some time together in good conversation and good topics. So for those that were brave enough to be our first two to go at this, I want to give them a special thanks. So Nick Spezza and Marissa. As you're watching them and you want to be a part of this series, please let us know as we're continuing this throughout the year. So I'm just going to pass it off. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much. So first order of business, Jana, thank you for setting this up, for sponsoring this event, and to Jean for sponsoring the event. If you don't notice, in the back there is some hot food and some cool drinks because our topic is engaging hot topics with cool heads. And also to Andrea and Tanae for setting up the room and managing all of this. Thank you so much for getting us started. So good afternoon. I'm Nick Spezza, and I do not pretend to be an expert at anything. But what I am going to pretend is, not pretend, I'm going to engage you as a member of your community today. And I want to talk about that. And that's the idea behind these sessions, right? How do we come together and engage each other? And there's a whole bunch of crap going on in the world right now and in our local environments. And so I think there is no better starting point than how we can build our community and support each other and willfully create the world we want to live in. That's my motto. So how do we do that stuff, and why is it important? Why is it important? What happens when people are incivil to each other? The data tells us they want to go away from the organization, from their engagement. People hide. This is just workplace data, but many of you are instructors, right? What do you think happens in the classroom when students experience incivility? Not necessarily from an instructor, right? But even from other students. What do you think happens? Is it the same kind of effect? Did they disengage and tune out? And if that happens, what happens to the classroom environment? How is the teacher's job? How is that student's job now in being a good learner? How can you be a good learner if you feel like you're protecting yourself all the time? How is civility or incivility affecting our country? Seven in 10 Americans say civility has declined since the last presidential election. I'm not even going to blame that on the person, but on what's happening. 8 in 10 Democrats say they're not having a good conversation anymore, leading our country. 65% of Republicans are saying they're not having a good conversation anymore. So no matter what side of the aisle you're on in your personal beliefs, nobody's advancing anything if the civility is gone. That sucks. Let's say that sucks. Thank you. That sucks. I didn't know we were going to go there today, but that'll work. Yeah, I appreciate that. This also sucks. We have policies and practices that may disenfranchise 800,000 of our community members. And you may or may not agree with DACA itself, but just the fact that we are putting people at risk like that makes me think, what message are we sending to other people who are potentially fragile? And we're here at a community college, right? We are here to serve the community. What we do is we provide on-ramps for people who want to improve their circumstances. We reach out to them, meet them where they are, right? We're student ready for them, and we want to pull them in. It's really hard for the student to feel college ready or any education ready if they're not sure what's happening in their world. So that sucks. That's not a mantra. Could become one. I'm going to find a better mantra by the time we move on. Let me set the stage, and then let's find some optimism in this. This thing where people drive vehicles into people, this is just the few I pulled off the web that happened this year. It's been going on a long time. It's not really new, but our awareness of it and the conversations about people harming people because of ideological differences is in our face right now, right? We have these conversations on our campus in a civil way. I want to see that spread everywhere. So this isn't new. Who's that guy? Yeah, why was he important to our history? This concept of winning without winning, or winning without shaming another party into humiliation of losing, is a really important thing. Yes? Who said yes? We're preaching. What do you know? Tell us. Testify.
Explaining the other, and it's trying to find human shield.
Yeah.
Wrong.
Yeah. So this idea, I call it othering. When you...
And a conflict
Yeah, go ahead.
should be cooperation.
Yeah. You're perpetuating a conflict, right? Maybe even escalating violence by saying you are bad, and when I turn over here, you are bad. If everybody's bad, where is the peace? Where is the resolution going to come from? What is going to come is more war, right? So this is a great set of thinking about how to create stability in the world. There were other people who thought this kind of stuff too, right? These are some of the folks we often think about in this setting. People, global, uniting. How does this make you feel when you read this? When you see this? I see a head nodding. What does that make you feel when you see this?
Well, to me, in a way, it's almost common sense. At the core of everything, we're all human. To heck with everything else. We focus on that part, and how do we move forward as not only a community on a campus, but as a country, as a world, focusing on just the human part of it.
Right.
Take all the labels out, take all the BS out of it, and how do we do this together? And working together is from the human aspect. So much can change, and we're so stuck in our own little bubble of crap that we can't see through that.
Yeah, I hate that bubble of crap. That's also a button. That sucks. The bubble of crap sucks. We're going to retitle this whole thing. The bubble of crap sucks. Yeah.
I think it's so hard
Please.
to do humanitarian work when everybody's being dehumanized. Yeah. And so we've got to get to that place right there, that whole unite the people in the globe thing, we've got to work through some of that other stuff first.
Yeah.
I think so often we're resistant to doing that, and we want to jump to the future and not address the present.
Yeah. So how do we do it? You segued me. I mean, that was perfect, Matt. Right? So how do we do that? You don't have to answer, but you may have an answer. I hope we have 37 answers, or however many people are in the room. I like this. So often in my career in education, I have met with students who were struggling, and they didn't know who they brought into the room riding on their shoulders. They weren't fully aware of the voices in their ears that had been there for 20 years of their life or the founding of their life, and they were still responding to that learned voice. And my favorite times with students is when I get to see them go from living a reactionary life which is one of pressure and potential victimization, to one of being the hero of their own story and challenging what they thought and starting to not just bring their lived self, because we will bring our lived self with us and we need to own that, but start to create their ideal self, the person they want to be in the world. And that happens, some of that work is understanding why we are who we are. I can't even fix a car, can't even fix a car if I don't know who made it and what the parts are that are in there, because if I want to change out a part, I kind of need to know what that is. And if I'm not doing that on myself, who is? Nobody's doing it. Once we hit a certain age, on your own, adios. Except when they get into an environment like this, right, with people like you. Because we're thinking about these things. We're creating spaces, safe spaces, to explore what people actually think. And to create an open mind. What the heck is a frog brain? Same thing. You want to say more?
Well, it's just your reactionary fight or flight kind of brain where you just are all about survival, kind of. You don't think very deeply about things.
That's perfect. Yeah. So that little part inside the middle of our brain is called the amygdala. And the amygdala takes over when we're in the threat environment or we feel a threat environment. And what we say is fight, flight, or freeze. In modern times, freeze is actually the dominant response to threat. So when you see someone with that deer in the headlights look, they can't hear you. Their frog brain is telling them, run away, run away, run away. They're not hearing the instructions that you may have told them for the third time. They're not hearing, I'm your friend right now, please sit down so we can They're not necessarily hearing anything you're saying because all of that cognitive structure that processes language and everything else has been shut down and taken over by the frog. You know what the frog responds to really well? Smells. So we have lovely smells in the room today. Hopefully they made you feel nurtured and home a little bit. When we create an environment, that actually helps people open up a little bit. Because when you're in the frog brain, do you think memory is active? No, memory is not active. The only thing that's active is that adrenaline system that wants you to move. And because we're so wired to be sociologically responsive, looking at each other, we don't even move anymore. We just sit there. I don't know what to do. I actually don't know what to do. So how do we create a space where we don't feel that way and we can still talk about the stuff that sucks in a hopeful environment that other people can also engage with us? Does that make any sense? Yeah? Does the frog brain thing make sense to everybody? Yeah? Anybody want to add to that? Because that's a powerful thing to think about. Cool. Create a safe space. This environment is lovely because we're going to have these dialogues, right? And this is going to be something that exists and it goes on and it will become what this community wants it to become, right? I heard Jana ask for feedback so that we can continue to make this space what it needs to be to serve this community. Yes? Yes. Yes. That does not suck. Thank you. And we have to bring those people who we are, those people that other people grew up and things happened to that we didn't necessarily have control over in our lives, but we've now taken ownership of because we are the champions of our lives now. And we have created who we are today. And we're continuing to create who we're going to be. And we're continuing to create the community we want to live in. You guys can come in. Come on in. Bring your stuff with you. And one of the really interesting things about change, and I know this organization doesn't know much about change, right? Change is hard. It's okay, you can leave it. Just come on in. There's food in the back. we have to be in a place where we can tolerate differences, even disagreements. Because if I don't know what the disagreement is about, how can I even take on your perspective and try to understand where you're coming from? And if you can't do the same thing, how can we find a place to meet in the middle and advance ourselves? Because true creative conflict creates the future. It's not easy, but we know how to do it. We create civility. We own our space. We set the standard, we model the standard, we help each other. Hey, you know what? This thing was good. You know what? I screwed up on this thing. I didn't mean it happened. We move on and we hold each other accountable. We say, you weren't doing what we said we were going to do together. Can you, please? And they go, yes, no, and you have that conversation. Because if you don't do it, who's going to do it? And if we don't do it now in this environment with all the stuff we said sucked, how are we going to create the space that doesn't suck? Or, I think this space doesn't suck, actually. How are we going to enhance, support, grow, and involve more in the cool spaces that are safe for this kind of dialogue? So the steps, start a conversation. Get it going. Doesn't have to be perfect. Lord knows I'm not. Get people together. Share ideas, share perspectives, multiple formats. Bring yourself to the conversation. This topic would have no passion in it today if I wasn't actually present with you here right now. Maybe another speaker could do a really great job with this, better job. But the passion of the person, whoever you are, has to come with you into the conversation. Or it's inauthentic and you're not actually creating safety for the other person. You have to be there to create safety for the other person. And remember, everybody's learning. It takes time. We're not sure what's going to happen to the future. But let's be unsure together and create that together. It's a leadership moment. What is leadership in today's day and age? Things change at such a rapid pace now that I can't tell you that the skills you need right this minute are going to be the same skills you'll need 5 years from now. What I can tell you is that if you learn your way into your life, if you continue to champion your future, you will make those changes and you will adapt to what's needed from you in every moment. Yes, Philip? You're nodding your head. You agree? I love that you agree with me. What's the right thing to do right now in this space? We should decide that, moment to moment. And the most important thing for me is if we're doing this well, we're actually generating hope. Because without hope, that champion wants to go back to bed. And we have those days, don't get me wrong. Yeah, we all have those days, and that sucks. Yeah, but we all need to know that we can gear up, we can armor up, we can put on our tool belts, right? It used to look like a whole set of metal and swords and stuff. Now, what does it look like? It looks like I got my phone in my pocket and I got my jacket. Whatever it needs to look like, we gear up and we create a little more hope. A little more that doesn't suck. A little more let's share a pot sticker and a lemonade. And what was it you were trying to say? I didn't hear you. Let me repeat that back. And can you tell me again what you said? Because if we do all of that together, we live here. Thank you for your attention.
That totally did not suck. I'm so excited for this. Okay, so here's what I need you to help me do. Chit chat with each other for like 3 minutes as we switch speakers. Please know in this series that the point is not that the topics are connected. This is just people talking from their space. But we're going to have to mic up Marissa, and we don't want to awkwardly stare at her as she gets dressed. So if you can help by chit chat for a minute, and we'll be going again in a couple minutes. Thank you for giving us a couple minutes. This is Marissa Campbell, and she is going to talk to us. She's actually going to kill it, just in case you were wondering, about what strategy has taught me about life.
So I'm not much of an academic. I'm more of a storyteller. So what I'm getting ready to say is going to feel a lot different than what Nick has just said. It's going to look a little different, but I think you're going to notice that some of the themes are going to be very similar. Okay. Early one December morning, 19-year-old Valentina Stevens was lying in her bed in the apartment that she shared with her boyfriend, 23-year-old George Riddick III, when he entered the room and he took her life. They had been arguing the day before, and that argument continued throughout the night, and it escalated to the point where he put a gun to her head so forcefully that the muzzle left an imprint on her temple where she was shot. He didn't stop there. Valentina's uncle, Eddie Walker, also lived in that apartment with them, and he was in bed as well in his room. And he had a congenital hearing problem, and he wore hearing aids, but he had removed them when he heard Valentina and George Riddick arguing so that the sounds would be muffled and he could get some sleep. So he did not hear the gunshot that killed Valentina. He didn't know anything was happening until George Riddick entered his room and shot him 5 times. He did survive. He was airlifted to a local hospital. I found out about this shooting and that it occurred when the police called me because I owned the apartment where Valentina was murdered. At the time, I was living in in Norfolk, Virginia, and teaching at Tidewater Community College. And George Riddick and Valentina were not my students, but they certainly could have been. My students were primarily low-income, first-generation students of color. They lived in neighborhoods with bars on the windows. They were familiar with the sound of gunshots. And they would come to class and tell stories just in general chit-chat at the beginning of class, like all students do. But they would tell stories about seeing a girl beat up at the mall, or a guy jumped in the parking lot of 7-Eleven. And these stories were so frequent that it was obvious this was a routine part of their lives. And so I've been troubled for a while hearing these stories before Valentina lost her life. And the stories themselves were troubling, but what was even more troubling was that listening to the reactions of the students as they would tell these stories. And I understand that part of it was defense mechanism, right? Part of it was trying to act tough, creating solidarity within this group. But they would laugh, they would make jokes, they would find it entertaining. And when I talked to them about what they were seeing, they would tell me that these people who were attacked deserved it. They were asking for it, they had it coming, that this was an appropriate way to deal with conflict. And I wanted to change that conversation. And I wanted them to think differently about what they were seeing. Because I believed, and I especially believed this after Valentina was murdered, that we have this one person, George Riddick, who did this one terrible, brutal thing. And he created this ripple effect of grief and victimization that started with Valentina and Eddie Walker, but it rippled out to their family and friends, and to George Riddick's family and friends, and to the other people who shared this house that was divided into 3 apartments with them, the other tenants in the building, to the people on the street, to the first responders, out and out and out. And I knew if that had to be true, the opposite also had to be true. That if I could get my students to think about creating positive ripples, that with enough of those positive ripples, they could meet these ripples of grief and neutralize them. So what I asked them to do was tell me their stories in writing, because I'm an English teacher. And so as their final research paper, I gave them the option of tracing their family history of violence. And I said, tell me the story of when you yourself were a victim of violence or hatred or aggression. And tell me a story of a time when you were a bystander and a witness to an act of violence or aggression, and you didn't do anything about it. And now tell me what you as an individual can do to create some kind of change. Not waiting for a lawmaker, a politician, or someone else to do it. What can you do? And so they told me their stories, and they were terrible, horrific stories. And I heard stories of domestic violence and sexual assault and prison assault and addiction and homelessness. And they would come to class and they would have the doctor's notes for their sick children, and they would have obituaries of their friends and family members, and they would have their summons to court. And I thought, I cannot believe that they are even making it to class. And their perseverance was so inspiring, but at the same time I had to ask myself, they're so overwhelmed with their struggles, can they even think about how to create positive change? Because we're all burdened with all these things that happen to us in life. And we carry them around and they pile up and they weigh us down like stones. And they make us afraid and they make us angry. And they make us feel desperate. And we could take all these stones that we carry around with us and we could use them as weapons like George Riddick did. Or we could use them to cast ripples of kindness. And I wanted to encourage my students and let them know that they might feel tired and weighed down by all these things that they were carrying. But by standing up, by speaking out, by doing something, that their load would be lightened. And that if all of these students who came through my classes, if I could convince them, even a fraction of them, that that was true, that we would no longer be individuals and feeling overwhelmed and feeling like, what can I as a single person do? But we would be a group of people speaking in a united, strong, powerful voice. So I struggled with this. I struggled to get them to think differently about the illness, about the crime, about the poverty. And the stories that they were telling me were in a different setting than what I experienced growing up, but the stories were not totally unfamiliar to me because I also grew up in a place of extreme poverty. And I grew up in the eastern Kentucky coal fields of Appalachia. And there's not a lot of concrete and asphalt and tall city buildings there, so the settings of the stories were different, but the themes were the same. Families living in poverty, continuing that poverty generation after generation, families who didn't value an education. Finding it hard to believe that you could be anything more because you didn't see it around you. There weren't many opportunities, there was even less hope, and there were no role models. So it was hard to believe that you could be anything more than what you saw around you. So I understood where my students were coming from on that level. But I still tried to convince them they could use their stones that they were carrying as weapons, or they could do what Vagentina's godmother did. A couple of months after Vagentina's death, on what would have been her 20th birthday, her godmother released some purple and red helium balloons at the site where she was killed in an act of hope, but also to launch the nonprofit that she created out of her feelings of grief, out of this tragedy, that she turned it into positive change. And I tried to get my students to see that they could do the same thing. This December will be 11 years since that murder happened. And a lot has changed since then. I have moved here, obviously. I no longer teach there. Students' demographics are very different here. But they are still suffering. They carry their own weights, they carry their own burdens, they have their own stones that they're carrying. And my message has been the same, there and here. And I still try to tell my students that they should work for the greater good and work for change, even in small ways. So that's my message to them, and that's my message to you also, is that when you see the suffering, move towards it. Greet it with compassion. Try to lessen it if you can. And if you must cast stones, because we all have them, we're all rock collectors, we all have our burdens. So if you must cast stones, make sure you're using them to create ripples of kindness. Thank you.
Just trying to run away quickly. I would like to invite both Nick and Marissa to come back up, and we just have a few moments still. If you have questions or thoughts or moments that you would like to share that you connected with as you listened to either of their talks, I'd like to open that up.
I would like to say that if you want to take a small action that could have ripple effects, that at 1 o'clock there's some talking going on the sidewalks in support of our DACA students.
I have a question for Nick. Do you have some good ways to shrink the frog brain?
Yeah, that's a great question. So presence practices, which there are all kinds of different types of presence practices. So meditative practices can help. Some people use mantras. You know that thing that martial artists do when they scream? That's actually designed to break that freeze response. So there are those simple things that people can do. You don't necessarily want to use that yelling thing in every scenario. Even sometimes just like pinching your hand where people can't see it will give you a sensation and bring you back to yourself, the aware self that you're looking for when you're trying to engage other people. Does that help at all? Yeah.
Ivan, I was just going to add, it's part of being human. There's no shrinking it. There's no getting rid of it. Knowing it's there, I think, is part of it. So I guess that's my perspective. I mean,
Sure.
You need your amygdala.
You do. And so what the training I'm talking about helps you do is acknowledge that space that you're in, because it's part of you, and then choose to move out of it, move forward into the next thing. And it's kind of like an inoculation. The more you practice it, so which is why people who are in the military or armed forces, they practice these things, because the more you behave the way you want to behave, the more you will actually be that person you're trying to become.
Thank you for sharing your piece, because I feel like a a lot of resonance with that as somebody who tries to help take those stones and move them in some substantive way, right? Help the student work through that. I'm curious how you personally, hearing all of these stories of trauma and violence and pain and suffering, how do you make meaning out of that? And how do you kind of self-care in the midst of all of that?
Those of you who that will be only Mark who's in this room, who's in the writing program with me and has been in meetings with me. I always come back to what is within my realm of influence, right? So I can't change what's happening on a federal level, on a big level, but I can change how I respond to people, and I can change how they feel in my presence, and I can do those things, and I can do what I can to inspire them to do the same for others. So I don't know how to answer your question, because it's hard to hear these things that happen without getting sucked in, and without feeling overwhelmed by yourself. And so in some of these moments, I try to return to what can I do? What can I control? What message can I send that can be passed along into the world? What can I do for this student that they can then turn around and do for others? And I try to think about not the times that I've failed to do that, but the times that it has succeeded. And so the times that a student has come back to me and told me that they took those words to heart, and this is what they're doing with them, and trying to remember that there are those success stories out there, and that it's not all doom and gloom and darkness. And that's what sustains me, I guess. I don't know. It's not really an answer to a self-care question, but.
I appreciate it nonetheless.
Marissa, I think sometimes just reading those stories that they write and then being able to tell the student, look at what you just wrote, this is really good. And I think they see that.
Listening is what we can all do. I was just curious if, can you give an example of what the students might have written about? I loved your questions that you had them write, and one of them, the last one, was something like, what can you do to make a difference or make a change? And what were some of the suggestions, or even one suggestion that a student might have written to you?
They struggled with that. They found it hard to come up with answers. Yeah. And the answer that they most often came up with was education. And education reduces poverty, reduction in poverty reduces crime. And I tried to push them a little further than that, because that doesn't take into account compassion and personal responsibility, and giving back. And so that they didn't have real solid answers. They were just, this is like the first step on this journey of them even really thinking about it. But some of them did come back to me later and say, I was in the library and I saw someone on a computer looking at something they shouldn't be looking at. And in the past, I would have just ignored it and mind my own business. But I remember what you said, and I told the librarian, right? Small thing.
Yeah.
Or when I was in the Navy, I was raped. And I didn't tell anybody. I was too ashamed to do it. But writing about it in this class gave me the courage to tell my family, and now the healing can begin. So in those essays, I wouldn't say they came up with anything real concrete, but they would come back to me and tell me these things after time had passed, and they tried putting some of those words into action.
Yeah, I mean, I think even thinking about it helps you take action. Just going back to what Nick said about being reactive versus owning your life or being the hero of your life. Like, even just talking about it with people is an action that's valuable.
I wanted to say, I want to piggyback on that just a little bit because I think both of you said, you can't unknow something. Once, I mean, that is the beauty and magic and wonder of education, is that once you've been exposed to it and you've started to think about it, you can't pretend like you didn't. And that's the amazing.
Once again, can you help me thank them? This was in a time where I crave leadership and good leadership. Both of you having the courage to step forward and try this with us, I appreciate that so much. This is a series we're going to try to continue throughout the year. We do have feedback forms, or you can talk to either Andrea or I and let us know what worked, what didn't, here's how I would do this differently, this is what I would like to try, anything like that. We are so open to hearing that. I'd like to have you help me thank Andrea once again. Way too many of you have worked with me and know I can go like this, I have this idea! And then it would stay in idea space without people like Andrea who can take it and make it a reality and really put the energy and time into really making this a special event. So thank you very much for making this happen. I'm going to give a little teaser. On October 5th, we have 2 additional speakers coming. Matt Peterson will be speaking on cultivating resilience, a personal journey of trauma and healing. And then Eric Salahub will be speaking on I'm selfish and you should be too.
You asked for a provocative title.
Obviously worked, right? We love it. So please fill out evaluation forms if you haven't eaten all the yummy food. Please do that. And thank you both once again.